Alrighty, so it's 3 minutes past. I think we have a few more people on the call now. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening. Thank you for joining the call today. We appreciate you and your time. I'm gonna let my co-host take it away today, Winnie.
Thank you, Shez. Hi, everyone. Habari, and welcome to our webinar today. So if you're dialing across next street in Dar es Salaam, I see some people in Dar es Salaam. If it's around the globe, within the continent, we are really happy to have you with us today. My name is Winnie Nyato, as Shez has just mentioned. I'm program manager here at Ubongo, and I'm based in Dar es Salaam. And I'll be your host for today. New face today. You used to share, so I'll be hosting you for today. And I hope we'll have a great time together. So we are here to have a special conversation today, and it's all about learning, reflecting, and growing together. And that's basically what our theme for today is. And Shez, if you could go to the next slide, please. Yeah, so insights into impact, where what we are learning and where we are going. That's basically our theme for today. So we'll be sharing fresh insights from a recent study. I'm not sure if we are still calling it recent, but for us it's a recent study that we ran, and we are we'll also be giving you behind the scenes of our mail work, what our priorities are, and where we are. And today we have a big team from Ubongo, but I'd like to mention we also have Mwasi. Mwasi, if you can, you know, wave or, say something, our leader who has been instrumental in our work. And she's here, but she'll be sharing something later at the end of the session. And yeah, you'll get to hear her voice, vibrant voice always. Yeah. And now I'm also not alone. We have a whole group of Ubongoers in here that are with me today. But I'd like to mention or call out Cleo, our brilliant Director of Education and Research, who will be taking us through the research findings of the recent study I've just mentioned, what we discovered and why it matters. But we also have Philip, our mail manager and learning enthusiast, and he will walk us through our mail priorities for this year and what we are putting together over this year. Yeah, but I also mentioned we have lots of other Ubongwas. Please, if you can just put up your name, where you're from, how you're feeling, so that everyone can just know who's in the room and who's supporting all the behind the scenes to this webinar as well. And so before we start, just quick housekeeping, maybe. So we'll be together for an hour, and we hope it will be an insightful and engaging one. Please say hi on the chat so we know who's here with us today. You can just say your name, where you're from, and how are you feeling today. We had some music and some kids if you're happy and let us know. So please do that on the chats as we go ahead. And yeah, we'll have a Q&A session at the end of our session, but please feel free to drop your questions and thoughts as we go on with the presentations. Yeah, and with that, I would love now to welcome and hand over to Cleo, who will be taking us through this insightful and new exciting research that we've done. Over to you, Cleo. Karibu.
Asante, Winnie, and hi, everybody. So yeah, as Winnie said, I'm going to be presenting some of our latest research today. And I think, Winnie, you can already go to the next slide. So as you all are aware, Ubongo's latest flagship show has been the Nuzo and Namia show, which is a show targeting 6 to 9-year-olds at the early primary stage. We launched it last year, and it's, I suppose, a new venture for Ubongo in that our other two shows, Akili and Me and Ubongo Kids, are quite well established. We have a lot of amazing insights around the impact of those shows. For us, this was something new. not only in terms of a new age group for Ubongo, but also in terms of the education subject areas and learning objectives that we were trying to teach. So Nuzo and Namia, if you've seen the show, you'll know it's very colorful, it's vibrant, it has the Pan-African feel, drawing in lessons from across the entire continent of Africa. But it has a very, I suppose, despite the fun look of the show, it has a serious objective, which is we want to improve learning outcomes, especially around early literacy. And I suppose the rationale for that is that we've realized that looking at data from, you know, national level assessments, but also predictions by the World Bank around the state of literacy and numeracy across Africa and across the world after the pandemic. What we have seen is kind of this large-scale decline in literacy outcomes, especially around reading to understand or reading comprehension. News on NAM showed aims to help kids to move along, I suppose, that path to gaining comprehension skills and skills, a bit easier learning. So the show focused on those two areas across 13 episodes, and it was broadcast across the continent. But in one particular country, we delayed the broadcast in order to conduct a very thorough randomized control trial. And so in Kenya, the broadcast was delayed, and we've been able to get some really interesting insights through doing that, because we've been able to follow up then with the kids who watch the show. Next slide, Winnie. So we did all of this through a partnership, and I'll speak a bit in detail about the nature of this partnership because it was quite a unique one. We worked with the Busara Center for Behavioral Economics, who are based in Kenya. And we really wanted to kind of understand, you know, how can a television program build better readers in a very naturalistic setting. Next slide, Winnie. And so we did this through a research practice partnership. And so the difference between a research practice partnership and a more traditional academic type of partnership is that this was a real true collaboration between the two organizations. From the beginning, we co-created what the research should look like, but also we're very intentional around making clear points where we could start incorporating insights from the research very early into the show. I know some of you might have been notified at different points that, you know, we were experiencing maybe a delay in getting the initial pilot episodes out. One of the reasons for that was that we were actually figuring out the sort of balance in this partnership with Busara to see how best we could actually start using that data straight away. So as they were piloting questions for the study, we were actually using those insights to already make the show better and more relevant for the kids that we served. And so I'll be talking a bit about how we did that today as well. So we had two studies. The first one is the main study. So we kind of internally, you'll hear us talk about the Busara study. And when we talk about that, really, this is the main one we're talking about. It was funded by the EdTech Hub, and it was a randomized control trial, largely naturalistic. So the kids were watching at home. The only intervention we had was that the show was launched without any marketing, except for the children who were in the treatment group. They received SMS updates to their parents' phone, nudging them to go and watch Nuzo and Namia on Saturday morning at 10 o'clock. But other than that small SMS nudge, the children were left to decide whether they watch or don't watch. And so at the end, we actually also tested for that. So We found there were some children in the control group who had found the show either through word of mouth or just happened upon it while it was being broadcast. So they got actually pulled into the treatment group. And equally, we had some kids in the treatment group who received the SMS and just decided, actually, we don't want to watch it. So they kind of then became part of the control group. But we were looking at the impact on reading comprehension, gender attitudes and behaviors, and then also curiosity and motivation under the kind of socio-emotional domain. Next slide, Winnie. Yeah, so I think you can flick through these. So these are some of the bigger questions that we were trying to answer. One of the really interesting ones was, what impact does the show have on kids who watch in a language that is maybe not their mother tongue? And this was really important to us because we know in Kenya, the school system begins in the mother tongue, but most usually not even always the mother tongue, sometimes Kiswahili, which, is not the mother tongue of all the kids who are attending school. But then around grade 3, that's when in Kenya and in a lot of other countries, we see a shift in the language policy in school. And then the school system actually shifts to English after that point. So given the age group that we were looking at, we were kind of looking at grade 1 to 3 kids. We were really interested to see, does this show do anything to prepare them better for that shift to the English language that's going to happen from grade 4? And then also knowing that we have a lot of kids who are attending school in languages that is not maybe their first language. Yeah, we were just interested to see kind of, is there any transfer of skills there that happens? Next slide, Winnie. Yeah, so maybe on the first study, because I think I'll focus more on the lab study today and the reasons for it, but maybe just to because for some of you, you might be hearing of this first study for the first time today. What we did find with the first study was that there was a movement, there was an increase in children's comprehension skills, but it wasn't statistically significant. The same with gender attitudes and behaviors. We saw a real mix there, with some actually having a negative impact, which we kind of attributed to there being very few characters in the show. So whereas in other shows, there are a lot of opportunities for maybe girl characters or girl children to see girl characters that they identify with, boy children to see boy characters that they identify with. In Nuzo and Namia, we had the original pool of characters was very, very small. And so there was kind of limited opportunity to see those gender interactions in the show. Then on the language piece, we saw, that we weren't really seeing that statistically significant impact that we wanted to see on a large scale. We were seeing that there was movement happening, but we weren't really sure why it was happening. We weren't really sure what was driving the increase. And again, it wasn't really enough for us to kind of say this show going out in English is working. So that led us on to this second study, which we refer to as the lab study. And this was something that we decided to prioritize using funding from the Lego Foundation Build a World of Play grant, to really look into some of those questions we still had remaining after the big study. So looking at, like, what are the key drivers of the impact for those kids. We saw that there was a positive trend in the movement. So then we were wondering, if the show had been broadcast in Swahili, and if we had tested the kids in Kiswahili, regardless of what the government schooling policy says, would we have seen more statistically significant impact? And then also looking at the role of the caregiver, does that make a difference? Maybe the cohort of kids who were experiencing that impact in the first study, maybe they watched with their parents. Maybe the ones who didn't see as much impact watched alone. We didn't know, but we were trying to kind of triangulate that with all of the other studies we've done in the past to come up with some theories. And so we decided to do a more focused lab in the field design with 155 households based in Nairobi. And this was through Swahili. Next slide. So yeah, as I said, like we wanted to see, first of all, is there an impact if they just watch in Swahili? But also, is there a transfer of skills? So how we looked at that was if a child watches the show in Swahili and we test them afterwards in Swahili, what happens then if we test them in English? Is there going to be a transfer of those skills they gained in Swahili to English? The same with their mother tongue. So for this group, we use Luo. So we wanted to see, okay, can those skills transfer maybe from Kiswahili to Luo? Then, as I said, the caregiver engagement piece was really important. Also, looking at kind of the mechanisms. So what are the mechanisms and the practices that emerge when they watch the show just by observing them that might be helping to, that might be things that lead to that increase that we can then lean into at the design stage. And then looking at the neurodiversity piece as well, raising awareness around autism was a secondary objective of the show. So looking a bit more into that. So the result of that study was this playbook that we have co-published with Busara. And we have essentially pulled all the lessons from the research practice partnership, but also the results of the study itself into one playbook. It's available for download online. We recently launched it at the World Literacy Summit in Oxford. And we are planning to do more regional rollouts of it as well, because we felt that the lessons learned through the partnership and generated by that collaboration were so valuable that it allowed both sides, both the kind of research side and the practice part, to really, I suppose, approach both research and design in a more innovative and impactful way than if we had just conducted a usual kind of academic study. Next slide. So yeah, for the lab design, we had our control group. We also had the first treatment group, which that was just a group of children who watched Nuzo and Namia in Swahili. And then the second treatment group watched Nuzo and Namia in Swahili, but we also added on a caregiver engagement piece at the end. Next. And so as we were designing this intervention, we were trying to also look and see what are some of the existing models that could support some of the findings that we were beginning to see in the first study, especially around kind of how children build, how you build good readers. And so one of the models that we came across that we really leaned heavily into for this lab study was the active view of reading model, which basically the model suggests that in addition to your simple word recognition, phonics, phonological awareness, alphabet, and comprehension skills, that there's also in this green circle on the left, there's also this component of self-regulation, which is strongly linked to socio-emotional learning, motivation, engagement, executive function skills, and strategy use. And so we started to kind of play around with different elements of this, especially when designing the caregiver segment that we used for this show, for this study, to start to see like maybe some of these things as we begin to piece them together can help us to see more impact than we did in the original study. Next slide. I think you can go to the next one, Winnie. Yeah, so with the group as well, with the lab study, we took a more focused approach. So we specifically targeted households that are in our usual target audience as Ubongo. So we looked for children who would come from families who are lower income. We also looked for children who have access to TVs because we wanted to see, if these are a typical target audience, what impact are we having? We took 50% from grade 3 because we were interested in kind of that preparation for transition to the English language. And then the rest came from grades 1 and 2. And we had kind of almost that 50-50 split on gender as well. Next slide. So the biggest learnings that we got from this, for me, the most interesting one was around language. So I think it's something that's widely accepted in the education sector that children learn best in the language that they speak at home, or their mother tongue, or the language that they're most fluent in. And that's something that has really driven Ubongo as well in terms of our language adaptation agenda, and also the advocacy work we do with broadcasters around broadcasting local language content. But this study was the first time that we really got very strong evidence that in order for significant learning to take place, the children really need to be watching in the language that they most understand. So what we saw here was that when children watched in Kiswahili, you can go to the next slide, Winnie. When children watched in Kiswahili, we actually saw a very large increase in their reading comprehension. It was statistically significant across both of the treatment groups, but more so with the group that watch with caregivers. And I think that is another finding that I'll speak a little bit about. But I think in general, the biggest finding that we found from this was that the statistically significant improvement came about when children watched in Kiswahili. It didn't transfer to English and Luo. And so what that tells us is that language adaptation is way more important than we even previously thought. Previously, we had kind of a theory that maybe if they watch in one language, they can transfer those skills across other languages. That might be the case for other subject areas. But for reading comprehension, that didn't happen. So it's really more important than we ever thought for children to be actually watching the shows and learning in their first language. Next slide. The next learning is around the integration of cell and literacy. So in the original study, the large scale one, we did see statistically significant impact on curiosity and motivation. And from that, we kind of guessed that that was probably because if you follow our theory of change for the show, we guess that children are more curious now about reading. And so that will lead to children reading more, which will lead to them becoming better readers. And that kind of takes me on to the next part as well, which is around the mechanistic pathways. What we actually found was that although curiosity is piqued by the show, it didn't necessarily lead to children reading more. There was actually something else cognitively that was going on that was leading children to becoming better readers after watching the show. And so from this, and also looking at the existing research that's out there, looking at that active view of reading model, we think it's likely that it's linked to executive function, that when children are curious, that actually triggers their executive function skills, which allows them to be better readers. And that's something we're looking into more, and I'll speak a bit about that when I talk about how we're integrating these learnings. And as I said, the caregiver engagement is crucial. So we saw a good impact from the group that watched alone, but the impact when they watched with caregivers was even more. And that a lot of the time in our observation, we saw that the caregivers weren't really doing anything very active. They were just present with the child and maybe pointed out certain things to them in the show, or redirected the child if the child was, maybe daydreaming. But we saw that, this was really, really important in making sure that we maximize the gains from the show. Next slide. So in terms of what we're doing about all of this, because it was a lot of information for us to get, we did expand the research stage beyond what we had originally planned because we were just finding so many interesting insights. And now we've been trying to see how can we incorporate this into season 2 to make season 2 much more impactful. So this is our curriculum from season 1. And as you can see, each episode had a comprehension strategy, the learning objective, which kind of expands on that comprehension strategy, and a cell or socio-emotional learning component. So so for example, the first one, children are visualizing, creating images in their head. And then the cell one was growth mindset, believe in yourself. These two were not connected in any way. We didn't really, at the time, we were thinking more around the simple view of reading model, which doesn't really place emphasis on those cell skills, so we hadn't linked them. For season 2, you can go to the next one, Rennie. Yeah, so for season 2, we have decided to reiterate the original learning objectives from season 1, but now link them more specifically with those cell skills, specifically around executive functioning. So we have consulted experts on this. We've worked particularly with Professor Dr. Alessandra Ward, who has done a lot of research into this area to actually link the executive function skills with the comprehension skills, so that we're kind of triggering that curiosity, but also giving children a strategy and a skill that they can use to hopefully see more impact on the comprehension side this time around. Next slide, Winnie. And then we've also looked at the format of the show. So previously, the comprehension strategy was only dealt with during the main segment. We're now incorporating the before, during, and after reading stages into the show. So starting with looking at kind of print awareness, things like, the function of the title, the reading direction. Then during the show, honing in on the comprehension strategy. And then after the show, going back to kind of recall, looking at new vocabulary. So again, going back to that active view of reading model, trying to hit as many of those big circles as we can, so that we're building more holistic readers and trying to influence those pathways that we know are so important for children to improve their reading. Next slide. So I know that's a lot of information. The good news is you don't have to take it all in based on what I just said. It's all in our playbook, along with a lot of other key learnings. So I would invite you all you can scan the QR code. We'll also be sharing this with you afterwards. You can download the playbook. We also have a working paper at the moment. We have some papers that have been submitted for peer review to different journals that we're planning to publish around the original study. And so those are in progress at the moment as well. But I'd invite you to download this, have a look through, digest. If you have any questions, please reach out. But also please share it widely in your networks, because we would really love other organizations, other creators to start looking at these type of partnerships, and hopefully kind of create a more, I suppose, dynamic impact evaluation environment in the education sector. So I think that's all from my side. I think I'll hand back to you, Winnie, or perhaps over to Philip. I'll let you decide. But thank you, everyone, and hopefully we might have time for questions at the end.
Yeah, thank you very much, Cleo, for that. And yeah, just to get to gauge the room temperature, how are you feeling so far from the insights? Just using an emoji. Please remember to put up your questions if there's anything on the chat before we go to our next session. And as I invite Philip, at Ubongo, we say fail fast, fail forward. I failed first. I didn't mention that we are recording our session, so kindly bear with me, but I'm failing forward. So I'm asking for your consent for us to record this. There are some of our funders that were not able to make it, so we would like to share what we are discussing with them later on. You can give me a thumbs up emoji for your consent for that. And I'll also welcome Philip for the next session.
Yeah, thanks, Winnie. I don't know whether you've got the emojis so that I can continue. All right.
I have gotten the emojis. Thank you.
Okay, that's very good. And thanks to our Director of Education and Research, Cleo, for setting the previous presentation. So I'm here to present the behind our insights. So what Cleo has just shared is also part of the male teams is under the educational research team. So we work together under the leadership of Cleo. So I'm going to talk about what we are actually learning through our activities. I'm going to show you some of the activities that we are currently implementing, what we know so far. There are some areas that remain unclear, and at Ubongo we are always learning. And so those gray areas are also leading us into additional activities that we think can be implemented strategically across the next 4 years. So I'll show some of the activities that we are doing this year, as well as some of the activities that we plan to do based on what we know so far in regards to monitoring, evaluation, and learning. But these activities are categorized into 4 areas. So we have learning outcomes, we have caregivers, they are really anchored on our theory of change, the specific measurement groups. If you look, for example, the caregivers and the teachers, we have also a level of some of activities around the children. But the stages, if you look through, we are really zooming in on the audience metrics. These are the output, and content design and monitoring. This is at the output level. But as you go up, then we measure, the immediate effects on the caregivers, the teachers, around social norms, behavior shifts. And then as you go to the very top, we look at the learning outcomes. Even we are also now talking about, children reaching their potential. So we have several indicators, and I will not go through each one in the interest of time, because we also want to leave a Q&A, enough time for the Q&A session. But just to give you an idea, for example, at the national level, we had set out to, learn our impact through EGRA assessments. As you know, these are historically been led by USAID. The tool was developed by USAID, and governments have been relying on USAID funding to do these assessments. So we actually also have been relying on this. But as you know, with the departure of USAID, these EGRA assessments may not happen at the national level. So, having alternative discussions, and how can we really measure our impact at the national level? And we have, recently been awarded a social impact measurement grant by an organization called Impact Track Africa. And this will help us to measure beyond learning outcomes, the kind of impact that we have. So when we say we vision where children reach their potential and impact on their communities, what do we really, so that's the award is actually helping us to define that more, in detail, but also be able to collect and, analyze this data through their platform in a more structured way, so that we can visualize Ubongo social impact, beyond the learning outcomes. And we have conducted several, assessments at the outcome level around the literacy, numeracy, SAIL, just like Cleo has just presented. We are now also, going to the last mile to conduct some child confidence and motivation assessments. These comprise of both baseline and endline assessments, really to understand how about children that are in conflict, children that have dropped out of school. How does our model, impact on them differently? So we are now looking at the granular level of our impact. We have about 8 impact assessments, which have shown proof of concept that yes, indeed, the model impacts on learning outcomes. But now, in terms of granularity, we are trying to look at what about in the different areas, what about in the using different distribution models. So those are the kind of activities that we are trying to assess in this year to understand which one impacts more than the other, so that we can scale from an informed point of view. There is also a pilot which has been launched in Nigeria. This is now Ubongo teacher resource manual that's now being provided to the teachers. It's a pilot, but it's not only in Nigeria, but also in other countries to try and introduce this teaching approach, learning through play approach to the teachers where they are in their environments. And we are starting to gather some experiences, immediate interactions and perceptions from those teachers. Ubongo has not yet been really in the classroom. So at times the question we come across, especially from you, dear funders, is so the learning, the model impacts on learning outcomes. So how about the teachers then? So that's now a pilot that we have set out to kind of understand our impact from the teacher's perspective, as well as also later on it will inform our impacts in the learning environment in a classroom setting. So at the output level, it's really looking at audience measurement, and I will talk about this. I'll specifically talk about our audience measurement, which we have been measuring through Geopol, is our partner, but I'll talk about that later. So let me give you a bit of details on the impact. So as I've mentioned, EGRA results have shown that there's low literacy numeracy in countries where Ubongo operates. I think also Cleo mentioned this, was also seen in the World Bank reports. Less than 30% of primary 3 to primary 6 learners meet the minimum reading and numeracy benchmarks in East Africa. So those are some of the findings which have been there. But Ubongo content, we know that has shown positive effects in the RCTs that we have conducted. But these do not directly map national proficiency rates, as we don't have the capacity for that. So there are existing some data gaps to access some of this benchmarking. Also attribution. Ubongo's impact is positive, but it's hard directly linked to national gains. So there are some attribution challenges. Also, the definitions of proficiency are not the same across countries. Okay, EGRA uses 5 words per minute, but when you talk about proficiency, that can vary from one place to another. The USAID EGRA tests were trying to standardize that. So what are we really doing about this? We are actually shifting, as I've mentioned, from just purely quantitative measurements to qualitative ones, but in a more structured way. Also redefining or enhancing our definitions of social impact to include different aspects like social norms, our impact on social norms, caregiver empowerment, equitable access, and other child engagement areas. But also, we are also talking about capturing some voices and real-time caregiver, putting faces to this impact. We know that we have not been doing that, but now this is going to be a more intentional, more deliberate approach to kind of gather some outcomes or some impacts of our model, but on a national level using a wider reaching tool like the impact track tool. So this is really to explore our impacts in the various areas where we are operating. Next slide, please. Yes. With regards to the children that have reported increased confidence and motivation towards learning, these indicators are actually, I'm reading from our mail plan. We've seen that from impact studies that our educational content exhibits gains in literacy and numeracy, but also there's been improvements in children's preparedness for school. This was from earlier studies. But again, the long-term impact of our content is still an area which is, are these gains sustainable? That requires more longitudinal impact assessments. And also, as I mentioned, understanding the variability in terms of granularity. What about on low-income households? What about on, children that are, accessing it digitally versus those that are accessing offline? Are we doing those comparisons? Those are some of the things that we are looking in terms of, at the last mile. So we have a focus study that could provide valuable insights on this, and it will be, based on our preferable model, which is partnership model, to try and understand some of these. We've been partnering with Triple Line. This is in Kakuma, in Kenya, for this particular study. It's still ongoing. So it's one of the activities that we have for this year, and the results are not yet out. Can you please go to the next slide? I see we are almost. Okay, yeah. I've talked about this one. We also build on the data that we get from our partners, like 60 decibels. We've seen some increases in gains, but also we've seen some gains, some loss in terms of net promoter score. And so we're curious to understand why has there been some regional satisfaction declines in some areas and some increases in some areas. So we've planned to conduct some focus group discussions on specific countries which have shown a significant decline for some time, like in Rwanda and Malawi. But then, there also context behind all of this. This is going to be like identifying specific focus group discussions to kind of, speak to the end users and understand what is it that they are observing, and why would they promote or why would they not promote our model. Next slide, please. Can we go to the next slide, please, Winnie?
Shares.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Philip. I think Shaz's internet has. Shaz, can you hear us?
Sorry, guys. I think my internet went away for a second. It's back now. I changed the slide.
Okay. Yeah. Can you please go to the next slide? I talked about this. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, in terms of literacy and numeracy, we have an indicator which is around the percent of children that are demonstrating. This is something that we have attempted before, literacy and numeracy, with the exception of STEM and SEL. But then we are now saying we need to do this assessment using a suitable model that has been informed by our growth team to test that, in terms of what works for scale. And as I mentioned earlier, this has been seen to be like this partnership model of distribution is perhaps the most effective way moving forward. So this assessment will be done using that model, and it will be for Ubongo season 7. And we'll try to understand also and infuse granularity impact analysis in this, obtaining some additional analysis around performance tracking, separating gains by quartiles and the other demographic factors. So again, this is a study that we have, we are yet to roll out, but we have, we have a design in place, and also we have a distribution model that we are, fine tuning, so that then we can use this very distribution model to do the measurement. Okay, I think in the interest of time, I'll skip. Can you please go to the next slide? Yeah, okay, yeah, I think that will be it. As I said, we need to also leave enough time for the Q&A. So I thank you very much, and I'll have to hand it over back to you, Winnie.
All right, thank you very much, Philip, for that walkthrough on what are some of the things we are still trying to understand, and also what our plans in terms of MEL are, or the different studies that we are doing over this year. And thank you as well, Cleo, for unpacking the findings so clearly with us. I would like to use the next 10 minutes for questions, or any observations or anything that you'd like for us to brainstorm or take with us. Karibuni. I haven't seen any on the chats. So you're welcome to unmute and ask. Welcome, Kenichi.
Hi, Winnie. Yeah, and thank you, Cleo and Philip. That was very, very helpful. So I just had a couple of questions, and we can definitely like discuss this after the call. But my first question is really around interpreting the second study. I obviously haven't read it yet, but the 0.485 standard deviation gain, obviously, it is great. But I think for us, it would be great to understand that more in like lay people's, like in terms of what does it mean in reading comprehension. Like previously we talked about like percentage gains in comprehension and learning outcomes. So I'm wondering how you might translate to 0.485. And then my second question was, this is to Philip, is in terms of like the NPS drop, I think this was like something I was curious about before, the Net Promoter Score. But yeah, just kind of curious, like why you think Tanzania is the only place where it's improving, and what your like current like hypothesis is on, like why it might be decreasing in other places. But yeah, those are my two questions. Thank you.
I can
All right.
actually, sorry, should
should
I
we
just
start
get an
with-
answer?
Let's see if there are a couple of, so that if you can answer them all together. Are there any more questions from anyone else?
One question for me, sorry, Casson from Quartier Philanthropy. So thanks for sharing the findings from the Busara study. I was wondering if the question on language, how do you see this translating in the various different geographies in which you air shows, like not necessarily just like not just this one, but also Akili and me, and if you're thinking differently about it in different countries in which you operate.
All right, over to you, Cleo.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think on the first question, yeah, I think it's a great question. Because yeah, it's easy to just look and say, you know, for 0.48 standard deviation is good, but then what is good and what does that mean? So I think that's something that we're now working with Busara on, although the formal research part of the partnership has ended. The next part that we're moving on to now is dissemination. And so something that we're looking into doing is like, how can we translate that into sort of like real world gains? Also maybe pull that into some comparisons with some of our other research that we have done, but also comparisons to other existing interventions that are out there to help contextualize that more. So that's something that we're working on, and we'll be able to share with you in the coming months. And then the question on language. So first of all, I would say I would be quite cautious to kind of generalize this finding to all of the shows, because it was quite specific to reading comprehension. So for example, with Akili and me, we have seen what we focus on mainly with Akili and me is English as an additional language through the local language. And so, for example, with Akili, we saw that, if it's done in English, Kiswahili, we've tested it in Kinyarwanda and Hausa, and we saw that the learning gains retained and maintained pretty stably across each of those language adaptations. And I think that's due to kind of the format of the show, right? And it's created with that in mind. I think in terms of what this has kind of triggered for us in terms of priorities is an extra push with our broadcast team to really advocate, to now use this to advocate to local broadcasters and national level broadcasters to include more local language content, because although we are very committed to language adaptation, we do sometimes face resistance from the broadcasters, and also sometimes resistance from caregivers and parents who say, they would prefer for their children to watch in English. And there is that perception that we encounter a lot that, English is maybe more attractive or more higher status language for children to engage with. And so I think this finding is something now that we will really use to advocate for that push towards more local language content availability. I hope I've answered your question.
I think there was maybe quickly there was one around the NPS going down.
Philip, do you want to take that?
Yes, please. Yeah, I mean, we have, just to be clear, we have seen some NPS drops from 1 year to another year, so year to year, some gains from year to year. We have not seen like a steep decline across the year. So it varies from, like, for example, Nigeria, there was a drop last year. And then there was a gain in Tanzania in the same year. But in terms of what could be some of the reasons behind what we are observing is we are thinking that there are some contextual factors around this, i.e. language. There are issues to do with cultural relevance and platform access that need deeper exploration. These are likely driving both negative and positive results, but the kind of survey that we use for collecting this kind of data does not provide us the opportunity to explore that user experience insight, which is quite critical. So this year we have tagged some focus group discussions, for example, in those countries where we have seen some gain, like in Tanzania, but also in Rwanda, where I've seen a drop, and Nigeria, to understand why. The point really is on data granularity. It's quite spot on. Right now, we are trying to kind of look at maybe can we have some ethnographic studies and stakeholder dialogues in Nigeria, Rwanda, and Malawi to tailoring the content around messaging. So it is something that we are curious about as well, and not taking the NPS in and of itself as an indicator, as a one-off, but rather something that we can look at more holistically, but also we are trying to pilots for deeper feedback mechanisms. For example, Cleo mentioned about the SMS nudges. Is it because maybe in some areas there's, for example, in Tanzania, it could be that the shows are more prominent, parents know about them. Is that informing? So that's some of the hypotheses we have. Is that informing some of the NPS we see as opposed to other countries? But for now, it's still a hypothesis, and we cannot really tag specific explanations behind these NPS scores that we're seeing. But we would and we will go there with a different measurement approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philip. And we exactly have 5 minutes. If there are any more questions or anything, we are always an email away, call away. But we can't go off without hearing anything from our CEO, Mwasi. So this will be it from me, and she will do the closing remarks as well. And thank you very much for taking part. To you, Mwasi.
Thank you, Winnie, and thank you for running an amazing session. Thank you for the team, and thank you for everybody who made the time to join. We truly appreciate it. We just really appreciate you coming along on this journey with us. So a few things that I just wanted to say while closing up. In the next few weeks, we'll share our Q2 VIP update, as well as the recording of this call. I would also like to set up some mid-year check-in calls, either sometime in July or maybe towards sometime in August, which would really be appreciated. Another thing that we do know is that when funders hear from funders that they have an amazing grantee that they should be able to support, it really helps us a long way. So what we'll also do is reshare some of the funders we're looking to connect with, and would appreciate any introductions. And another thing that I did want to ask is that we're still recruiting for board members. Fingers crossed we might have one soon in the education space, but we're not sure yet. But what we're looking for right now is anyone there'll be a great board member who has experience in animation and content production, media and technology, market entry and expansion, as well as any experience around finance, investment, or fundraising. That'll be super appreciated. I can also put this in email Would really appreciate any potential candidates that you can think of, as we really want to continue to focus on creating a strong governance system within our organization. And yeah, if there's any additional follow-ups with the questions, please feel free to shoot us a line. We always love hearing from you. We love the challenges, we love the questions, and we love the fact that you keep pushing us to be better. So just wanted to say again that we truly appreciate you.